What up, YouTube? Here with another episode of Talk Boxing. On this episode, I'm going to be talking about the latest fights that happened in the sport of boxing, as well as the latest news that came about when it comes to the sport of boxing. Anyways, without any further ado, let's get to this episode of Talk Boxing. The first fight I'm going to be talking about and giving my post-fight thoughts on is the super lightweight world title fight with Katie Taylor and Chantel Cameron. It was Chantel Cameron defending her lineal and WBC and IBF World Super Lightweight title versus Katie Taylor, who's the undisputed World Lightweight champion, moving up in weight. And this was supposed to be a rematch with Amanda Serrano and her from their fight from last year, and that was arguably the best fight, the most thrilling fight, the most competitive fight that we saw from the year 2022. However, Amanda Serrano had to back out of that fight for whatever reason. And y'all remember when they fought last year in that compelling bout, it was in New York, and that is where I think Amanda Serrano is from. I don't know if she's from Puerto Rico and she resides in New York, or I don't know if she's born in New York, but I know that it's where she's from, all right? And that's why the rematch was going to be in Ireland, which is where Katie Taylor is from. And Amanda Serrano versus Katie Taylor, the rematch couldn't happen. That's why Katie Taylor found a replacement opponent in Chantel Cameron, who's undefeated still and is the champion, the lineal champion as super lightweight, and she is a high quality fighter amongst women's boxing, pound for pound, and she definitely did prove that in this fight versus Katie Taylor, who is arguably, in many boxing fans' pound for pound rankings, the best female fighter in the sport of boxing. And she's undefeated. She is arguably the most famous female boxer that is currently active right now. She's got a huge fan base, especially out there at England, Ireland area. As y'all know, if y'all want to compare the enthusiasm when it comes to the sport of boxing and the appreciation for the sport, the fans over there in England and Ireland is way more tapped in and more appreciative and more attentive to the sport of boxing than the fans in America. It's hands down no comparison. And y'all saw that. Y'all saw Katie Taylor for her fight, her return fight in her home crowd of Ireland. It was many fans that were in attendance for this fight. And Chantel Cameron, she's from England, which isn't too far from Ireland, and her having a name as well, not as of a recognizable name as Katie Taylor. However, people know her out there as well, regardless of the fact that her reputation isn't as up there as Katie Taylor. And many people would have showed out with the anticipation of seeing yet another fight with her and Amanda Serrano in Ireland this time. Yet people still showed up because it was going to be Katie Taylor coming back to Ireland, trying to put on a thrilling show, a good performance for the people that came out for her. And her and her promotion found a great replacement opponent in Chantel Cameron, undefeated lineal world champion at super lightweight. And I'm going to tell y'all the results of this fight before I give y'all the summary of what happened in the fight. Chantel Cameron won this fight quite decisively. It was competitive. I would say, because of the action of the fight. However, Cameron got the better and definitely was the clear winner in this fight. I personally had the fight scored 97-93 in favor of Chantel Cameron, and she won via decision, retaining her lineal and IBF and WBC super lightweight title, and she remains undefeated while Katie Taylor takes her first professional defeat. And Katie Taylor, I gotta give her credit for taking on another great challenge, stepping up in weight to try and get another world title at another weight class, and taking on the best fighter at that division as well. And that's definitely a warrior, brave step up for Katie Taylor, showing that she's a fighting champion for sure. And this fight was a good competitive fight, good back and forth action. If y'all haven't watched the fight yet, I definitely recommend y'all go check that fight out. It was, as I said, good back and forth action between the two fighters. Chantel Cameron fought a good fight. She was accurate with her shots. She was fast on her foot. Her pressure, her aggression was a key factor in this fight. Her punch output, her work rate, her volume was definitely a factor that helped her gain this win versus Katie Taylor and holding on to her lineal super lightweight world titles. And she was accurate with her combos, her ability to put her punches together, and Katie Taylor just couldn't put a stop to Chantel Cameron's come forward style and couldn't put out that gas of Chantel Cameron, and she didn't have the answers to neutralize and to counter the offense of Cameron in this fight. And Katie Taylor is a technically sound fighter, and she is accurate with her shots. She's good at counterpunching as well. She just couldn't put a stop to Cameron's attacks. She couldn't stop Chantel Cameron at her tracks, and she couldn't land enough devastating shots at Cameron for Cameron to back off of her. And Cameron was getting the better of the exchanges. Cameron was getting the better positions through backing Taylor up with her punch output, with her volume, and with the combination work, and with her aggressiveness, and with her accuracy and her flurries of punches. And that's why I gotta give a shout out, a salute, a credit to a very good fight fought by Chantel Cameron. And I'm sure Katie Taylor wants to run it back with her competitiveness, her eagerness that she has within her, as I say arguably being in the convo as one of the best fighters in women's boxing as of today. And this is her only defeat, and being undefeated isn't everything when it comes to the sport of boxing. I mean, we could go and look to all-time greats when it comes to the sport of boxing, and you look at the legends' records, majority of them have L's on their records. This is another experience she could learn from, and she can make adjustments. And this just means that she took on all comers, and she took on the best fights available out there for her. And I'm sure she wants to try and take those titles from Chantel Cameron and avenge her L, because she still is the undisputed lightweight champion where she fights at, and this was a step up in weight for her. I don't think she's ever fought at super lightweight, so this was a new ground for Katie Taylor. And this just adds to the scene, the competitiveness that's going on amongst the weight classes that's from featherweight all the way to super lightweight now when it comes to women's boxing. As y'all know, the undisputed featherweight champion is Amanda Serrano. The undisputed lightweight champion is Katie Taylor. The undisputed super featherweight champion is Alicia Baumgartner. And now Chantel Cameron getting this win over Katie Taylor as the lineal super lightweight champion. Now she adds herself to the scene when it comes to the top of the women's boxing right now. And I don't know how this is going to work out with Katie Taylor having that rivalry with Amanda Serrano. I don't know if Katie Taylor's going to have an immediate rematch versus Chantel Cameron, or if she's going to have a rematch for her next fight versus Amanda Serrano. And Alicia Baumgartner, who was doing commentary for this fight, she's there amongst the scene as well. Now, this is a good scene going on right now. This is a good look for the sport of boxing. And this definitely spices things up when it comes to women's boxing right now. And all these fighters that I just named are very well recognized names when it comes to women's boxing, household names for sure. And if I haven't mentioned anybody else that is amongst the top of the women's boxing scene right now when it comes to the featherweights on up to super lightweight, there's a unified super lightweight champion as well. Her name is Callie Reyes. She is the WBA and WBO super lightweight champion. She's up there. And as is Michaela Mayer, and as is Choi Hyun Mi, who is a unbeaten contender. Now, this is, as I said, a good look when it comes to boxing, and this definitely calls for a interesting scene when it comes to women's boxing from the featherweights on to the super lightweights. Anyways, y'all let me know what y'all opinions are from the fight that y'all saw between Chantel Cameron and Katie Taylor. Anyways, moving on to the next fight. The next fight I'm going to be talking about is the fight with Luis Alberto Lopez and Michael Conlan. Now, this fight was for the IBF featherweight title. Luis Alberto Lopez had won this fight last year when he defeated Josh Warrington via majority decision, a close, competitive, compelling bout, and this was his first defense versus a longtime contender, Michael Conlan, who's been trying to capture a world title ever since he turned pro. Michael Conlan had a illustrious amateur career, and he's had a good come up as a pro. However, anytime he challenged for a world title as a pro, he came up short, as he did in this fight versus Luis Alberto Lopez as well. And this fight ended via knockout, much like his title fight versus Leigh Wood last year. And that was arguably the best knockout of the year 2022, when we saw Leigh Wood score that knockout win versus him. And we saw something similar to that in this fight versus Luis Alberto Lopez, because the knockout Luis Alberto Lopez scored to retain his IBF featherweight world title was a devastating one, and it is up there as one of the best knockouts this year thus far. And the results was Luis Alberto Lopez scored a knockout win in the 5th round via a devastating uppercut. It was an emphatic statement-making knockout win, and it definitely put every boxing fan who's tapped into the sport of boxing on notice, and this definitely stamped Luis Alberto Lopez as a threat in the featherweight division, as a champion who fights at the top of the featherweights, and that definitely should have put all the other top fighters who are champions fighting amongst the top of that weight class. And this is good, two impressive back-to-back wins for Luis Alberto Lopez, getting a win the way he did versus Michael Conlan. And Michael Conlan, like how Katie Taylor fought in her hometown, Michael Conlan fought in his hometown of Belfast, Northern Ireland as well. And I'm sure Conlan would like to run it back, because as Katie Taylor, her taking the L and her comeback home fight out there in Ireland, and her not getting the W as the fans who showed out for her expected, many people in attendance for this fight was expecting Michael Conlan to capture a world title as a pro in the featherweight division, which he's been searching for a very long time, and he fell short by yet another knockout loss. And unlike the fight that we saw with Katie Taylor and Chantel Cameron, this doesn't necessarily call for a rematch, and Michael Conlan hasn't built up a stamped professional career as one of the elite champions like a Katie Taylor. He hasn't built a legacy like that yet, not to make comparisons, respectfully speaking. And this fight was disappointing for Michael Conlan and his fans because of the way he lost. And Michael Conlan, he had a good build until he took his first loss versus Leigh Wood, and now this is his second defeat in his second world title fight, and he's gonna have to climb back up amongst the ranks in the featherweight division, and he's got to get some wins under his belt before he can challenge for another world title in the featherweight division. And how the fight went, Michael Conlan was definitely the more technically sound fighter. Luis Alberto Lopez was the power puncher with the harder hits, and he's the more aggressive fighter with that pressure come forward style. Let's engage in that back and forth exchange. And it was a crash with two different styles. And what we saw in this fight was the aggressor winning this fight with this pressure and this volume punching, and the difference when it came to the power in their shots. Michael Conlan's reactions to the shots that Lopez was landing against them, that would put Michael Conlan on the retreat mode and wouldn't want to engage and wouldn't want to throw. I'm talking about how Michael Conlan would react to Lopez's attacks and offense. He wouldn't want to defend with throwing shots back, as Michael Conlan would be more on the avoidance side and would shell up instead of throwing back. And Luis Alberto Lopez, his key punches in this fight was the uppercut and the hooks. And Michael Conlan, his job was supposed to be keeping the distance between him and Lopez. And he couldn't do that because he was punch shot, and he would get pressured back, and he would be overwhelmed by the volume and the aggression of Luis Alberto Lopez. And Lopez was able to push him back, and Michael Conlan's punches wouldn't keep Lopez off of him. And that was what made a difference in this fight. And when Conlan would be ducking and dodging from Lopez's power shots because he respected the power of Lopez, in the 5th round when he ducked under to avoid hooks from Lopez, which was a success factor in this fight for Lopez, while Michael Conlan had his head down to avoid the hooks from Lopez from within. Then that's when Lopez caught him with his head down with a uppercut that he didn't see coming, and that floored Conlan, and Conlan was knocked out, and his corner knew that, and that's why his corner threw in the towel, and there was no need for the referee to count to 10 because Conlan was knocked out. He wasn't getting back up from that uppercut, and Luis Alberto Lopez retains his IBF World Featherweight title. And as I said, this is a good look for Luis Alberto Lopez. And this definitely, as I said before, puts him on notice as a top champion amongst all the champions in the featherweight division. And what I like to see next for Luis Alberto Lopez when it comes to defending his IBF featherweight world title, I like to see another fight with him and Josh Warrington. They had a thrilling, compelling, competitive first fight. I thought Lopez had won that fight, and I'm sure Warrington would like another shot at trying to gain back his IBF featherweight title that he lost to Luis Alberto Lopez. And I'm sure the fans would like to see another fight with Lopez and Warrington. And as for Michael Conlan, as I already said, I already talked about what should and could be next for Michael Conlan. He's got to work back up through the ranks again before he could put himself in there for contention to challenge once again for any of the world featherweight titles. And I don't know if Lopez wants to fight Robeisy Ramirez, who fights more in America than in the UK or Europe or Latin America. And they're with different promotions. Now, I don't know if any unification bout is going to come out of that. And the same goes for the WBC featherweight champion Ray Vargas, who fights over there in America and not the UK, and he fights with a different promotion as well. Robeisy Ramirez with Top Rank, Ray Vargas with PBC, and then Brendan Figueroa, Mark Mixayo, they also fight under the PBC banner as well, and they fight more in America than they do anywhere else. And if y'all go look at the IBF rankings, Mauricio Lara, who had a fight on the same day as well, he is ranked next as the top contender according to the IBF, and then as is Robeisy Ramirez, who is a champion already. And Mauricio Lara, I'm gonna talk about his fight versus Leigh Wood next. And IBF rankings, I don't know how the rankings is looking outside of the top contenders that they got next to the champion. And the ranks when it comes to these organizations of the world titles in boxing, it don't be the way it should be as how majority of boxing fans want to see it. That's the politic element of the sport of boxing, right? And most boxing fans who are quote unquote educated don't like that aspect of the game. And as I said, it would be more difficult for him to make fights versus fighters like Robeisy Ramirez and Ray Vargas, Figueroa, Mixayo, and Gary Russell. Guys who fight under the PBC and Top Rank banner, the American promotions. It'll be more easier for Lopez to fight versus English fighters out there in the UK and Europe than making fights versus fighters who fight more frequent out there in America. And as I said, the best fight that Lopez can have next is, I say, versus Josh Warrington or Leigh Wood or names like that, man. That's what I suggest should be next for Luis Alberto Lopez. I like how the featherweight division is looking right now. Anyways, moving on to the next fight. The next fight I'm gonna be talking about was for the WBA featherweight world title, the rematch with Mauricio Lara and Leigh Woods. And before this fight, during the weigh-ins, the WBA had to have who was supposed to be the defending champion, Mauricio Lara, vacate the WBA featherweight title because he couldn't make weight. And now this puts the question out there, is Mauricio Lara still going to compete at featherweight, or is he going to move up to super featherweight? Because if he has trouble making weight at featherweight, it would only be right for him to move to super featherweight, where that weight at that weight class fits his frame better at. And that's why they had given the WBA featherweight title prior to the fight happening to Leigh Woods. If y'all remember, these two fought earlier this year, and Mauricio Lara won via knockout in what was a devastating knockout, and is still one of the strong candidates for winning the award for Knockout of the Year thus far in the year 2023. Anyways, before I give y'all a summary of what happened in the fight, I'm going to tell y'all the results first. The rematch with Mauricio Lara and Leigh Woods ended in a decision. It went the distance, with Leigh Woods winning the fight via unanimous decision. I personally had the fight scored 116 to 111 in favor of Wood, and he has scored a knockdown as well, catching Mauricio Lara off guard with a swift counter shot. And how the fight went, Wood fought a good fight. Wood fought a very smart, very technical fight. He was very fundamentally sound in this fight. He showed good ring generalship, good footwork, superior, more speedy footwork that definitely helped him win this fight with this ability to maneuver to counter Lara's offense. Mauricio Lara was very one-dimensional in this fight, and his technical flaws definitely was displayed in this fight. And Mauricio Lara is very dependent on one aspect of his arsenal, and that being the power that he depends on very much so to win the fight. And only having that part, that element of the game of boxing, when it's so many different elements and aspects that fighters can use and add to their arsenals to have them secure wins in the ring, and for him to only depend on his power and his hooks mainly, that isn't gonna have him winning all his fights at a top level. And this was a perfect display of that. And Leigh Woods, if y'all go watch the first fight versus Mauricio Lara, prior to him getting knocked out, he was winning the fight as well. He was showing better technical abilities, and fundamentals, and he was fighting a good fight. He was able to keep the distance with him and Lara until he got knocked out. However, in the rematch, Wood did a good job throughout the whole fight at maintaining and keeping the distance between him and Lara. And Lara couldn't execute his game plan and land the strong shots because Leigh Wood did a good job at maneuvering and having the fight being fought at the spots in the ring that he wanted the fight to be fought at, and the range that this fight was being competed at was at the range where he's comfortable at, where he can land his shots and get out the way. And that's a brilliant fight, and that is one of the sweet elements of the sweet science, the fundamentals, the technical, the pure skills of boxing more than the brawling type. And y'all saw how the Lopez Conlan fight went. That was an example of that, as I mentioned during the coverage of that fight. And in that fight, Lopez being the aggressive volume puncher, brawler, pressure fighter, getting the better of the technical fighter in their fight. However, in the fight with Lara and Wood, it was the opposite. It was the more technical, more skilled boxer with the superior abilities when it comes to the fundamentals, getting the better of the power puncher, the brawling type fighter. And as I said, this fight was quite one-sided. Lara was getting frustrated, and as the fight went on, the punches started to wear him down, and it started to accumulate, and his target was going away as the fight wore on. And that's why this was quite of a one-sided fight. And as I said, I had the fight score 116-111 in favor of Leigh Woods. He was accurate with his shots, and he was putting his punches very well together. A brilliant fight, a good win, a good look for Leigh Woods, and he is now the new WBA featherweight world champion. And as I said, the featherweight divisions got a good scene going on right now. It's very competitive. We have two new champions amongst the featherweight division. As I said, the IBF world champion now is Luis Alberto Lopez, and now the WBA featherweight champion is Leigh Woods. And then, as y'all know, Robesi Ramirez, he won a fight, I think, a few months ago and became the new WBO featherweight champion. And I think he only has one loss in his professional career, and that came from his first ever professional fight. And as I said, I'd like to see Leigh Woods have another fight with Mauricio Lara. I know I said Mauricio Lara was losing the fight prior to him scoring that knockout over Leigh Woods in their first fight, and he got outboxed in the second fight as he did. It was basically a continuation from what was going on in the first fight prior to the knockout in the second fight. And that's why a lot of boxing fans is saying a third trilogy fight with Mauricio Lara and Leigh Wood isn't necessary. However, I'm quite sure that Lara wants to run it back because he got the win first, and then Leigh Wood got the win in the second fight, and I know he wants another shot at being WBA World Featherweight Champion, and I wouldn't mind seeing it. I think it's fair that Lara gets another title shot at reclaiming and getting back his WBA World Featherweight title, and that's if he decides to still fight at featherweight, because as I said during the weigh-ins, he couldn't make weight. And if, as I said, he doesn't decide to move up to super featherweight and decides to compete and fight at featherweight still, then there's still good quality fights that Mauricio Lara can have, and he still has, I say, unfinished business versus Josh Warrington. He did knock out Josh Warrington in their first fight, and then the second fight it ended in a controversial ending with it being a no contest due to a clash of heads. And I'm sure that many boxing fans would like to see a rematch with Mauricio Lara and Josh Warrington because of the quality fight that they produced. However, it wouldn't be smart on Warrington's behalf, and it wouldn't be as I say on the beneficiary of Josh Warrington's part, because now Mauricio Lara is no longer a champion in the featherweight division, and Josh Warrington is gonna look to try and become a world champion in the featherweight division again. And that's why it'll make more sense for him to challenge for any of the world titles and to take another fight versus Mauricio Lara again. And if y'all go watch the first fight with Mauricio Lara and Leigh Wood, Josh Warrington was in attendance for that fight, and there was talks about Mauricio Lara fighting Josh Warrington in a trilogy bout for his WBA featherweight world title. And now people are saying either they want to see Luis Alberto Lopez, who successfully defended his IBF world featherweight title, versus Michael Conlan on that same day, in another fight versus Josh Warrington, or they want to see a fight with Leigh Wood and Josh Warrington, or another fight with Mauricio Lara and Josh Warrington to see who could challenge either Leigh Wood or Luis Alberto Lopez, most likely, to see who's the top contender out there amongst the top of the featherweights. And then there could be maybe a unification title bout with Luis Alberto Lopez and Leigh Wood. That would be a compelling title fight between two champions at the featherweight division. I think that's a good idea. I think that'd definitely be a good look. Anyways, moving on to the next fight. Alright, the next fight I'm going to be talking about is the fight with Lawrence Okolie and Chris Billiam Smith. It was for the WBO Cruiserweight World title. And I say this with all due respect, it was the worst fight of that night. It was a very busy, very good day for the sport of boxing, especially out there in the UK. And this fight was a disappointing fight. It was a messy, sloppy, untechnical, low-skilled fight that we saw. And I say this with the utmost respect. And as y'all know, Lawrence Okolie is the most recognizable name in the cruiserweight division. And he's been building up momentum and hype behind him as the next big thing to come out of the UK. And this definitely derailed that momentum, and it showed that he has a lot to work on, especially when it comes to technical flaws that he showed in this fight, such as overzealousness and overaggression. And he's got to be able to control the pressure that he tries to bring versus his opponents. And when he gets overzealous and overtly aggressive, he tends to lose control. And when he gets close to his opponents, he starts swinging wildly, and he starts losing focus. He doesn't zone in on his opponents. He doesn't focus on the target. And he starts missing with those wild haymakers and gets off balance and is everywhere with it. And he doesn't have his footing under control, and he doesn't have his balance intact, and he doesn't distribute his weight properly, and all that I named definitely was displayed in this fight, and Billiam Smith took advantage of that. And what was the key factor of this L that Lawrence Okolie took in this fight was not only him showing technical flaws, however, it was the 2-point deductions as well as the 2 knockdowns. And as I said, with the fundamental flaws that I named earlier, Billiam Smith was able to catch Lawrence Okolie slipping with those mistakes that he made in this fight versus him. And when you leave rooms such as Lawrence Okolie has let that error be shown the way he showed versus Billiam Smith in this fight, it would be easy for any professional fighter to take advantage of that. And that's why Lawrence Okolie is still a up-and-coming prospect fighter. He's got adjustments that he could add on, and he's got fundamentals and technical skills and attributes and arsenals that he could add to his game, things that he could improve on to make him more of a better and more of a complete fighter that can be a world champion once again with a better skills and better championship quality caliber abilities and less chinks in the armor to his game. That way he could be continuing the momentum that he has been building and the hype that he has been building as this next big thing to come out of the UK. And how this fight was being promoted, it was being built and promoted as yet another stepping stool fight for Lawrence Okolie. That's how it was being promoted as. Prior to this fight, I've never seen Billiam Smith fight before. I haven't heard about him. The cruiserweight division is a division that doesn't have a lot of coverage from the boxing enthusiasts, and the recognizable names in the cruiserweight division other than Lawrence Okolie is Badou Jack, who had recently won the WBC cruiserweight world title, versus Makabu, who was a former WBC cruiserweight world champion. That was earlier this year when Badou Jack won the WBC cruiserweight world title via 12th round TKO. And then there is Jai Okolie, who is the current IBF cruiserweight champion, and he had that knockout win versus Briedis, who's been a name that's been fighting amongst the top of the cruiserweight division for a while now, who gave Alexander Usyk the toughest fight of his career thus far. It's either Briedis or Chisora who gave Alexander Usyk the toughest fight of Usyk's pro career. Y'all remember that fight with Briedis and Usyk was the finals for the cruiserweight tournament of the Super Series World Boxing Tournament. And that was, as I said, a compelling competitive bout. And Okolie knocked out Briedis and definitely had that emphatic statement-making knockout win versus Briedis. And that's why I say Okolie is the top guy, the top champion in the cruiserweight division. And Billiam Smith, this fight, as I said, wasn't a typical championship winning fight performance that fans would expect out of a top quality fighter who's fighting for a world title. It's a disappointing, a win nonetheless. However, could have won in a better way. A win is a win, though. I'm sure they're probably going to run it back, regardless of the fact that the fight wasn't a compelling, entertaining fight at all. I don't think there's going to be any high requests from the boxing enthusiasts or anybody that was in attendance that watched this fight. I don't think there's going to be any hype behind a rematch with Lawrence Okolie and Chris Billiam Smith. However, I'm sure Lawrence Okolie and his team and his promoters would like another fight for Lawrence Okolie to avenge this loss, to continue his climb amongst the top of the cruiserweights, and for his name to be marketable, and for him to climb amongst that notoriety when it comes to having that hype once again come around him as a next big thing to come out of the UK. And I had this fight score. I know I went on to say what I saw from this fight. Usually I'll tell y'all the results and how I personally had the fight scored, and then I'll give y'all my post-fight thoughts. However, this is my scorecards, how I had this fight score with Okolie and Billiam. I had this fight score 113 to 110 in favor of Lawrence. I said in favor of Chris Billiam Smith. Pardon me, Lawrence Okolie. He got dropped twice, as I said, when he was making all those errors, leaving room for counters. Billiam Smith was able to catch him off guard and out of balance and out of position, and catching them coming in overtly aggressive and with a unneutralized pressure, and him being sloppy and messy and all over the place, and he got countered and got hit with flush shots that dropped him. And as I said, with him not being in control with what he's doing and just lunging himself in there and wrestling and grappling while in close proximity rather than throwing precise, crisp, accurate, effective shots, there was a lot of foul play and dirty tactics going on while they were in closer proximity, and the referee, that's why he had deducted 2 points. If Lawrence Okolie would have kept going with those penalties, he would have got disqualified instead of making it all the way to the distance. And as I said, it wasn't a clear, emphatic victory for Chris Billiam Smith. Definitely not the way to want to win a title. And now with that being said, that's my opinions from this fight that I saw with Lawrence Okolie and Chris Billiam Smith. And I'm not gonna be the one that's gonna ask for a rematch with Lawrence Okolie and Chris Billiam Smith. And I'm sure that's going to be the next move. I think Lawrence Okolie is promoted by Matchroom. Hence why Matchroom is going to want to have another fight with Lawrence Okolie and Chris Billiam Smith. And as I said, this definitely did derail that hype that they was trying to build around Lawrence Okolie. And for him to go back to training camp and go back and hit the gym, and while in his training camp, he's going to want to work on adjustments and fix his chinks in the armor and to strengthen his game and to add more technically sound fundamental skills that's going to sharpen his IQ when it comes to in-ring knowledge and boxing skills. Then he could have that avenging of that lost performance, hopefully, and that's positively speaking on his behalf. That's what him and his team is going to want to do for a comeback fight, to try and continue that hype train that Lawrence Okolie had going. And before he could challenge, I say, Opatai, or there's the WBA Cruiserweight Champion, Conlan, who's I think 27-0. I haven't seen a lot of his fights. However, he's undefeated and he's got an impressive record, and he is a world champion. And there's no unified world champions right now at the cruiserweight division. And Conlan, being a undefeated fighter and having a impressive record and a champion at that, that definitely has him underrated amongst the boxing fans. And before he could challenge somebody of that caliber and go for another world title in the cruiserweight division, I think he wants to make up for the performance versus Billiam Smith in another fight. And as I said, the cruiserweight division, there's not a lot of attention when it comes to that weight class. And for that weight class to get any attention, there should be a unification title bout amongst the champions other than Billiam Smith. Anyways, that's my thoughts of that fight. Moving on to the next subject to talk about on this episode of Talk Boxing is the two major fights that was announced a few weeks ago. And well, I'm going to be talking about the major fight that was announced a few weeks ago that came out of the sport of boxing. And the other fight, that fight is major as well, but this is that one fight that is what the fans has been wanting from the sport of boxing for a minute now. And this is the best match that the sport of boxing can produce. And it's been teased to the public, as I said, for a minute now. And it was announced that it's official, it's stamped, it's sealed, it's happening. July 29th, Vegas, on Showtime PPV. And if there's any pay-per-view fights that is pay-per-view quality, it's this fight. And y'all know what fight I'm talking about. It's the fight for the undisputed welterweight title with Errol Spence and Terrence Crawford, two of the best welterweights in the sport of boxing right now. Not only are they top 10 pound for pound, but top 5 pound for pound best fighters in the world. And we gonna see who is the best welterweight in the welterweight division. You have Errol Spence, who holds 3 of the 4 world titles, and that is the WBC, IBF, and WBA welterweight titles. I think he holds a lineal title as well, which is the Ring Magazine welterweight title, while Terrence Crawford holds the WBO welterweight title. And Terrence Crawford, he's a former undisputed champion who was undisputed champion at super lightweight, and he was a unified lightweight champion as well. And this fight, man, for a while it was being teased to the public, and that's why this fight got the hype that it has, because it's, as I said, the best fight that the sport of boxing can produce as of right now. And it was like a seesaw to the sports fans and the general public. It was being teased, oh, both teams are trying to come to an agreement. and it looked like, oh, it was being said, it was being rumored that both sides have came to terms to have this fight happen, and they couldn't come to an agreement. Neither teams, neither promotions can meet each other halfway to have this fight take place. And as I said, finally it's happening now though. The undisputed welterweight title bout with Errol Spence and Terrence Crawford is official. They finally came to mutual agreements on both sides, and boxing has been on the road this year, man. They're producing great fights this year thus far. All the fights that the public wants to see. Earlier this year, we saw the fight with Tank Davis and Ryan Garcia, and we saw Devin Haney versus Vasily Lomachenko, and then now we're getting this fight with Errol Spence and Terrence Crawford. And on that same week, there is Naoya Inoue and Stephen Fulton for the unified super bantamweight title. Man, it's definitely a good year that the sport of boxing is having, and fights like these are a good look for the sport of boxing. That's going to bring a lot of attention from not only the boxing enthusiasts and the sports enthusiasts, but the general public. And as I said, it's a healthy look. It's a good look for boxing. Anyways, I'm not gonna get too much in depth about this fight with Errol Spence and Terrence Crawford. I'm gonna make a whole preview video for this up and coming fight for the undisputed welterweight title with Errol Spence and Terrence Crawford. Be on the lookout for that. And then the fight that was also announced that same week was the super featherweight world title bout with Emmanuel Navarrete versus Oscar Valdez. And this fight has been teased and hyped about and talked about, and it's happening in August out there in Arizona for the WBO super featherweight title. And you got two top level high quality fighters, Emmanuel Navarrete and Oscar Valdez. Both got fan friendly styles, and they're gonna produce fireworks come that day in August with these two fighters when they meet in the ring. And that is also gonna be a great fight that the fans of the sport is gonna want to be on the lookout for. Anyways, as I said, boxing, man, they've been on a roll. They're producing all the fights that the fans want to see and are requesting for. Can't complain here, man. And it's definitely looking good this year for boxing. Anyways, y'all let me know with all the subjects that I had talked about on this episode of Talk Boxing. Y'all let me know what y'all opinions are in the comments. And that does it for this episode. I'm out of here, y'all. Comment, subscribe, share, like, all that good stuff. And peace.